Hi RJ, welcome, and
Hi.
thank you for agreeing to do this with me,
Okay,
and
no
welcome.
problem. It's fun.
Awesome.
I've done it. I'm doing it for the first time too. So it's yeah. I've never done this.
Yeah,
So it's
same here actually. I've actually recorded a session with another friend as an experiment, but it didn't go anywhere because we had some audio and video issues. But this time, hopefully, it's going to be much better. So first time for me as well, and thank you for agreeing to experiment. So this should be fun.
it's okay. I mean, I'm happy to do it. Yeah.
Cool. And introducing us as in so I'm Horatius, and we have Ajay here. I let Ajay introduce I let you introduce yourself, Ajay, but for me, I was working as a delivery manager at Ampion, and that's how I met you. And you worked with me, and we did work on Splunk projects together. That's our shared history. But beyond that, what I'll do is I'll let you do a self introduction, and then we'll go from there.
Cool. Sounds good. Thank you for having me here. Um, my name is Rijutha. Hore calls me RJ. That's from the workplace that we've worked together. But yeah, my name is Rijutha, and I'm sometimes called RJ. Um, I think I've probably not spent as much time as Horatius has in the IT space, but I think I've been here for over a decade now. My first role in IT was with Accenture, which is a consulting company. So, as many aspiring engineers in India do, they finish their computer science engineering and then look for jobs in, well, Accenture, TCS, Infosys. You hear all these names when you're finishing your engineering degrees. So, yeah, so my first job was at Accenture. I was there for about 6 years, and that's when, that's after 6 years, I moved on to another company called Ampion, which is where I met Horatius. And right now, I work at Atlassian within the observability space. So yeah, it's been over 15 years now.
Awesome, awesome. We have a bit of a shared history there. So
Yes.
like you mentioned, like any graduate coming out of engineering at the time, I joined Infosys, and I was there for uh, about 8 years, a little less, I would say. But I think it's a common story for a lot of folks from India who's into IT and engineering because we came out and we had this big outsourcing boom at the time, and we straight in went to work for one of these big companies like Accenture and Infosys and Wipro and TCS, and it gave us the foundation, I would say, in terms of stepping stone into the world of professional delivery. Um,
Definitely.
so from Accenture and your early journey, you did mention that you're now working in observability. Were you always in that, or was there a different story to how you came to the world of observability?
It definitely wasn't a planned career path, as I'm guessing it's not for many others in IT. My first role was actually as a production support engineer for a telecom customer at Accenture, and that meant, I mean, if you're in production support, as I think, which is now today translated to SRE right now, you would be involved in incidents, you would be involved in fixing issues, you're investigating incidents, troubleshooting, making your monitoring and your alerting and your dashboarding and everything better. So that's all part of what you would do if you're a production support person. So I think that's where the interest into observability in general came from because I love problem solving. So if there's an incident, sitting down and investigating whether it's looking at a huge amount of logs and trying to get to the root cause, I love doing it. And I think to me, observability is at the heart of understanding how systems behave. So that's where the interest started. And I think at that time, if I remember correctly, the word observability was never used. And this was in 2010. I don't remember even hearing the word observability. It was called monitoring.
Monitoring, yes, until recently, yes.
Yeah, it was called monitoring. And then I do remember that there were a number of tools used for different purposes at that time. So there was one that where you would look at simply just resource utilization. There was one that was doing synthetic monitoring. There was one looking at the application health. So yeah, so I think that's where the interest started. And as someone working in production support, you're also involved in how all of these tools and systems, they do evolve over time. You get to more modern observability stacks right now. So yeah, I think that's where, because my first role was at was in production support. That's where I got into observability, and I think gave me that interest in understanding system design, how you would measure the health of a system.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I again shared history there. I started out in production support as well, working for a large bank through Infosys, and there again for us it was plainly logging, monitoring. Wasn't there at the time. Like we had systems monitoring. However, as a programmer, we were mostly interested in diagnostics of what went wrong. So because we were in production support, we wanted to ensure that we follow the path of the logic and see where the logic failed. And at the time, we were developing in .NET, and I was going to ask you about some of the early tools you remember anyway. But logging wise, I remember Log4net, which is a library that allowed us to do logging to various places. Like you could configure whether you want to log to a database, whether you want to log to a file system, and then you had to actually even connect these things together, because if it was a website, you had your plain old IAS logging as well. Like you could turn on,
Yeah.
and there were some tools that will allow you to, some scripts that will allow you to create reports out of it. And slowly, I think it moved into unifying tools where first of all logging would be done to a database, so that you have the same place where you can do your queries and everything. But it was very expensive, right? Database write operations are quite expensive. So yeah, I remember some of them, because at one point we started introducing like a traceability ID, like a correlation ID, so we know that okay, there's a traceability for the transactions. And performance wise, the early tools that I remember is Windows performance
Oh,
counters.
yep.
Yeah, yeah. So we had to insert Windows performance counters, which in fact, if you are running a Windows machine, you can go to Task Manager and you can go to Performance Monitor, and then there is something called a Resource Monitor, and you go into that, and you can actually see a lot more stats. And the applications that we developed could introduce stats into it while it is running, which means that you can kind of pinpoint where the performance issues are, and that was very interesting as well. So yeah, so some background there. I'll throw to you to discuss a couple of the tools that you remember from the past.
Wow. I'll never forget Nagios. Nagios was used, I think, it was actually used for resource monitoring. So just looking at how the CPU and memory and the resource utilization for all of the nodes the infrastructure basically. And I do remember there was a HP tool. I can't quite remember what it was called, but that was used for synthetic monitoring. So basically, just simulating, what a successful request would be flowing through a system, and if it did fail at some point, you would see that telling you that hey, something's wrong with a specific request. So like you would have different types of requests, whether it is creating an account, updating an account, and things like that. So it would basically simulate every request and then check if that did go through. So there was synthetic monitoring. I do feel like at that point in time, we did have a lot more in-house handcrafted monitoring setup. Yeah, so using shell scripting or Perl scripting, you would try and scan through a huge amount of logs. So you would move your logs to a different location where you can do all this magic. and then get more information out of it. So there was a lot of in-house handcrafted monitoring at that time. And I think it was probably because there were very specific use cases, and also because we had a lot of legacy technology and systems at that time. So a lot of the tools available did not support what you wanted to get out of monitoring.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I might. I know you're currently working on Splunk, so I will. I will come to that. But before I do that, um, from the old time, like the other thing that we that I remember is that we had, again, I mean, I think we still do have various levels of monitoring. Like we had the critical errors to be logged, the information errors to be logged, and then verbose where you just get a flood of logs.
Yeah.
If you want to like really go deep. And then like you said, I do remember that we had a lot of scripts to actually go through them to figure out where things went wrong. um, from a monitoring perspective, because like that's the logging and the observability side. However, there's also the monitoring side, which is also coming under observability. My previous memories of that are from SCOM, which is a Windows-based tool where there was a Windows server that you set up for that, and then it will kind of monitor a lot of these machines for uptime, and then it will start collating the logs and it will trigger alerts. And you get a flood of emails if something goes wrong, like if the CPU is high, and then you start to um, figure out how to ignore the ones that you know that okay, this is normal during this time. There's a backup running. There's going to
Oh,
be a flood of emails. You can just ignore it.
alert fatigue.
Yes, yes, yeah, because everything was an email that was triggered into your email inbox, and the modern tools might be much better at doing some of these triaging as well. So I might throw to you to talk a little bit about Splunk and what it generally does and how it compares to all these old things that we were doing.
Yeah, when I think back to the time when I had to look at logs and get to what is going on? Why is this failing, and why do we have this incident? I think, yeah, I mean, when I look back to that time when Splunk wasn't even a known thing, it would have been a lot easier to have all the logs in one place. So Splunk is essentially a place where, I mean, I know it is known very popularly as a log management tool. So it's a log monitoring tool, which is where you send all your logs, and then you can run queries like similar to how you run SQL queries on a SQL database. You would run queries, and they're called search processing language queries that you would run on your logs to get whatever it is that you want out of them. If you want, for example, if you want to look at the number of errors that happened in the last 60 minutes, you're investigating an incident and you want to look at all the errors in the last 60 minutes, you would go in, you would run a query like that and get the list of errors, and then you would go through it, and then you would drill down further if you need. So basically that's what Splunk does, and you can build alerting on top of the logs that you have. So if you wanted to alert based on certain strings in your logs, if there's a certain string in the log, you want people in your team to be alerted, whether that's through emails. That lots of different kinds of integrations. So you can even integrate it to Slack. I know that it can because we do that today. So Slack, your alerting tools, wherever your incidents are being created, you can even automatically create incidents if you want. From Splunk, you could set up a lot of dashboarding and reports, whether it is just for your team, or whether it is for people responsible for incident management at an organization. You can do that. So I would say, although it's being called as a log monitoring solution, I would say you could put any data into it, because in my experience, I've not seen just logs being sent to it. You basically, and I've seen it being used as just a dumping ground where you put a lot of data and you want to run queries on it and get pretty fancy reports out of it, if you need to.
Yeah, it's good
But
you mentioned that because I did see that happening, and I was a bit surprised by that, uh, because I remember um, in one of the consultancies that I worked, I remember mentioning that, hey, we need to actually create a dashboard with the billing information for our customers, with all the data of the consultants coming in, and like that. This is how the projects are going. This is the current timesheets, and we need to spit out a report. And they immediately suggested Splunk. I'm like, I thought you would suggest Power BI, not
Yes.
Splunk. No, we can do this very easily in Splunk. So that is an interesting one. I just wanted to add that in.
Yeah, it's not ideal, but I think the reason why I've seen it happen is because, well, I've got all of this data sitting here, which could be from your logs or whatever sitting in Splunk, and then I have this sort of helping or enhancing data sitting here, and I want to create a report. Why don't I also send this to Splunk and then get a report out of it rather than trying to get some get some information out of Splunk, have a different tool that you would do the reporting in. Yeah, I think that's why, because people want to have a lot of whatever reporting that they want to get out of it. These days are mostly, it's not just one data set, it's usually multiple data sets. And because Splunk has the ability for you to store everything in one place, I think that's why people just say that, oh, everything that I need is already in Splunk. I have this data, why don't I push this also into Splunk and get what I need?
Yeah, it makes sense because in a report, you're trying to tell a story and you're trying to give context to the information that you're presenting. So what happens is that if you're only looking at logging data, then it is one side of the story, and then you have to have something else to piece it together. Whereas if you have additional data, like you mentioned, enhancing data, then it makes sense to create a report that actually provides the context, or as much context as you can, and create that report so that it's more understandable and readable. It makes quite a bit of sense. We'll come back to that integration space that you mentioned about, like, it can integrate to Slack and other things. But um, if you step back, like, what are the current sort of modules in Splunk? And because we know it as a logging tool, but it is much more.
They do have multiple, many different products today. Splunk Enterprise is the most common, which is where you send your logs to, and then you get an UI where you run your queries on. And that's where your alerting and dashboarding and everything is done. And all of these different integrations also work with Splunk Enterprise. There is they do provide a SaaS solution. It's called Splunk Cloud. So if you can't be bothered to set up or self-host your Splunk infrastructure, then you can use the SaaS version of Splunk. They do provide a separate multiple other products that usually work on top of Splunk Enterprise, whether that's self-hosted or on the, whether you're using self-hosting or their SaaS solution. So one of the most popular ones is Enterprise Security, which is being used by, I do know a lot of companies use that for their cyber security solutions. There is another product called IT Service Intelligence. I think it's even called ITSI sometimes. That's more of, that's again an app that you would install on top of your enterprise, and you would use it for, you can get, well, dashboarding, but it does provide very different UI features where you could define KPIs, key performance indicators in your data, and you can get very specific or very specific UIs out of it. I have seen a lot of business teams quite interested in it because you don't need to know search processing language, which is what Splunk supports. You don't need to know search processing language for you to use ITSI. So a lot of the business teams who want to build their own
Dashboards.
UIs and stuff. So the observability teams would set up the data set for them, and then they should be able to go in and build their own UIs. I think it's called Glass Tables. I haven't used that in a while, but I do remember. I think it's called Glass Tables.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there's a few other products which have a few other products that they have released in the recent years. So there's something called edge processing. edge processor and there's data stream processor, but this does not come on the UI part. It's where you ingest your data. That's where it comes in. If you want to do a lot of processing before you store your data, before you ingest your data, that's where these tools come into place. Yeah, these are the ones that I can remember. But there's, yeah, if you go to their knowledge base, you would see like a million other things that you can do.
Absolutely. The SaaS one is quite interesting. The SaaS versus on-premise dilemma that people have, especially I can see where SaaS would be struggling for somebody with a large volume of data, because most of the time SaaS would be based on the pricing of SaaS would be based on the data volume, how much you are transmitting between them. Whereas with an on-prem, like you can scale with bare metal servers as much as you want to. Again, that could be in an infrastructure as a service running again in the cloud, which is also not really the old version of bare metal servers or data centers, but even then, at least you can manage the costs in terms of what infrastructure you need. I did hear a little bit about a couple of people trying to get back into data centers. That's an interesting one because of all the SaaS costs. Um, but you did mention about the app that comes and sits on top of Splunk as well, right? Like, I mean, first of all, there's a lot of tools that you can choose from depending on your specific scenario. But the way it's also built is that it can support an ecosystem where whether it is Splunk own produced apps or it is apps produced by third party people. And I think that has been the way to go since a few years ago, because if you look at Microsoft Office 365, they have an app ecosystem where people can create apps for Outlook, people can create apps for SharePoint, people can create apps for various other things. One of the interesting one that I know from that is Find Time, where you can send an email to 5 people asking which times they are available for a meeting, and they can respond.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So similarly, Atlassian has when we use Jira, you have a lot of tools which allows you to add reporting in there. Um, uh, Microsoft DevOps, Azure DevOps also have similar sort of tools. So I think marketplace is kind of the way to go, so that you can use partners to build more functionality into your product rather than just trying to build it all yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Splunk does have a knowledge base where, I mean, in addition to apps and tools that are developed by Splunk, there would be a lot of developers out there who would have built tools. Well, you would sit and you would be solving a problem. You're trying to build something on Splunk, and then you think, well, this might be useful for other people who might be looking for something like this, and then you can publish yours to the Splunk knowledge base as well, and then yeah, other people should be able to consume them. A lot of people, and it's quite easy for you to test and use as well. You should be able to simply go to the knowledge base, sign in, download it. They usually come with documentation as to how you can set it up. So it's quite pretty easy for you to get set up with all of these, with all of the apps that's in the knowledge base. And it's very likely the usually what I do or what I suggest when people come to say, well, I want to do this in Splunk, I would say before you go and try and build your own thing, you should go and look here, because it's very likely someone's already done it. Because this has been around for years. And if you don't find it there, then maybe you go and build it. It just saves people a lot.
Yeah, and I'm sure there will be a way for them to commercialize that as well, right? So, for example, if you're a developer building an app for Splunk, there must be a way for them to include some sort of pricing into it, so that when they're used, they will automatically get charged for the usage.
Yeah, I'm not very sure how the pricing works, but I do know that most of the apps and tools that are available, they are free for you to use. Well, there are some products that Splunk does, so ITSI does have a pricing associated with it. So because you have a Splunk license to ingest data does not mean you can simply get ITSI. It does have a pricing associated to it. So there are some products that do have pricing associated to it, but most of the apps that you would find in the knowledge base, either supported by Splunk, which enables different integrations, or by third-party developers, they're all free for you to download and use. So I'm not quite sure how the pricing works in terms of, yeah.
Yeah. I do want to talk to you about how one gets into Splunk, and because I know that you have mentored a lot of young people who have come into our consultancy, like when we were working. But before that, I also want to ask essentially about where do you think the future is for Splunk and products like that? Where do you see it going? Have you noticed any industry trends or anything specific that you found interesting in your last few years of observation?
I think when I started doing Splunk, it was just for logs. But then, I should have mentioned Splunk does have a metrics solution as well. It's called Splunk Observability. So like I said, Splunk has expanded into the metrics space as well. They do have a Splunk Observability solution as well. For me, I think whether it is Splunk or any tool out there in the market, I think it has already happened. So everybody looks at standards, open telemetry. So you want to make sure that whatever it is that you provide or you want to enable your customers, you align with the standards in the industry. So open telemetry is one such thing. I would also say because you can't go through, you can't finish a tech podcast without talking about AI. So
Yes.
AI is the way to go. But I think where the challenge is you did mention about alerts, where you get a lot of alerts and you're trying to see through all the noise as to where the problem is. I think it can get a little tricky if AI just adds to the alert fatigue instead of helping you to mute out all the noise and actually get you to if that's what if that's what it's doing, then that's really really good. I think we'll get there with AI as well. So most observability tools do have an AI agent or an AI assistant for you to use their tools more effectively. So I think that's another thing that's coming up. I do know that Splunk does have it, so you can get the AI assistant to help you write queries and things like that. Of the other tools out there, I know that New Relic does. I did go to one of their conferences and I did see that they were introducing an AI assistant to help you to get to the root cause of the issue that you're investigating with.
Well, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially, I do love that query writing part
Yeah.
because um, because I used to do Excel formulas in the old-fashioned way, where I'll go and look up the formula. If I know the formula, I'll use it. Otherwise, I'll search for it. I'll see the examples, and then I go and type it out and try it out.
Yeah.
Whereas recently, a colleague of mine who is quite good with discovering more AI stuff mentioned, you can just ask ChatGPT and it will give you the formula.
Yeah.
What do you mean it will give you the formula? Or you say I have this data in column A and I have this data in column C, and I want to look up from column C to column A in this particular fashion, and the output should go to this particular place, and can you give me a formula for that? And it will actually give you with all the column names,
Yeah. That's
and in a way that all you have to do is take it and paste it in,
yeah.
and it works.
It does, yeah. I think it helps. It does definitely help our everyday, whatever it is that we want to do every day, and it does help a lot of the repetitive and the mundane work that we have to do. And it does well. And ChatGPT can help you write Splunk queries as well, or anything you want to do today to help make your job easier.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't need to know too much about the underlying logic right?
Yeah.
Because I don't need to know how VLOOKUP works in Excel. I just want to know that VLOOKUP works. Whereas in other areas where so for example, if I'm writing um, a CTE expression in SQL or something where I also want to understand how it works, you can actually ask the AI to say, give me the formula and also let me know how it actually works, and it'll give you an explanation.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting. The other one that you mentioned that clicked in my brain is about the summarizing part of it. So about you have 50,000 logs and you want to just get a summary of, can you summarize the important things, and then it would summarize things for you. Now there is always the probability issue with AI. It's not a probability of one, it's
Yeah.
always a probability of, I don't know, 0.9 or 0.8. So you still have that 10 to 20% there, or whatever the probability difference is, where there is some lost information. But all you're trying to do is trying to be a little bit more effective in terms of trying to ensure that you focus on the right problems, because information age is giving us a lot of info, and what we're trying to figure out is a way to draw our attention to and way to focus. So I think that's one place where this summarizing helps quite a bit.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think even today, a lot of the teams do struggle with, they have way too much information, whether it's in the form of reporting or logs or alerts or whatever that is. It's for someone who's responsible for incidents and SRE engineer. I think the most important thing is now there's no, today we're not living in a world where there is lack of access to information. You have enough information to look at. It's just trying to drown out all the noise and get to focus on what's important. In the middle of an incident, you don't have the time to look at logs, and then you don't have the time to piece together the story of what went wrong. You quickly want to get down to restoring whatever it's broken, and it's important if AI is going to help drown out that noise, all of the AI features that are provided by any tool out there in the market, if that's going to help drown out the noise, reduce alert fatigue, and help SREs to get to the root
Get
cause.
to the real problem. And when we talk about AI, we do have to talk about hallucination as well. So the only big problem is that if the AI will invent the issues that are not existing, it finds a few probabilities of things here and there and stitch together a story which is quite believable, but then when you fact check it, it might not be there. So I think ChatGPT was mentioning that there is still a lot of hallucination that happens when you ask for very specific things. But that would be quite interesting to see. But given that you are looking at data that is given to AI, and AI looks through the actual data to try and figure things out, compared to just a generic model, I think that should be reduced quite a bit, because that's what they're currently doing with the RAG models as well. That is to actually augment the generation with some real data, so that okay, it's not just made up, but you actually look through some data and saying that okay, there is this particular outcome or narrative or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And back to the topic that I mentioned earlier. So you have mentored a lot of people, and I would want to get your view of how should people get into the world of observability, and you can even provide some tips and tricks from your mentoring journey where you had to train people up to get up to speed so that they are fully productive members in the team.
I think you would start with a certain mindset first. It doesn't have to be learning a tool, whether that's Splunk or all of the different tools that's out there, Dynatrace, New Relic, Datadog, because tools would enable you. They're just enablers, but I think the first thing is to have the right mindset for observability. You would start off with, I would say, system design. So you will have to understand, if you're given an architecture or a system design and you are being told how would you implement a monitoring or an observability to monitor this particular system that is in front of you? I think that's where that needs to start. So because you have to know exactly what matters to determine, for you to be able to determine that this system in front of you is running as expected. What will you measure, and how you will measure it? What data do you need? You would start there before you actually get to the tool. So I would say the first thing is the mindset. So you should have the ability to look at an architecture and then come up with simple things like how would you determine the health of this system. There would be an architecture could be something as simple as having a front end and just a back end, or it could be a very complicated architecture with various different moving parts. So I think the first thing, I would say system design would be the first thing on the mind. And then you would move on to looking at the different tools that would enable you to do everything that you want to do. You could play around with tools. You go to GitHub, anything you need, it's there. You want to play around with open telemetry, it's all there. But I think it needs to start with the mindset. You should be a person who wants to get into observability should first be able to look at a system design and determine how to measure everything is okay with the system or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And tool wise, probably you and I started with support teams as well. So we got introduced to certain things and then we took it slowly from there. I think when I look back, it took a while for me to start understanding how everything fits in together. Because as a beginner, I remember mostly I was guided by people to learn different ways of doing things, and then slowly, slowly understanding the why behind it in terms of okay, look, this is why we're doing it, and some good training as well. So yeah, absolutely, that getting to that point of understanding the big picture is so important, to finally understand what are we trying to do with observability and how this particular tool can help with that. Yeah,
It helps
interesting.
you ask. I think you also have to be curious. Most days today, when engineers get started, there's already observability set up around the systems. So when you go in there, I think the first thing would be to ask, okay, why is this being measured? Why does this matter? Why does that matter? And then that helps you understand why certain things are measured in a certain way. What are the key signals that tell you what's wrong with the system and whether it's healthy or unhealthy? I think you also have to be quite curious to ask why, because we don't live in a world where we are going and trying from scratch, because we live in a world where everyone does have observability now in some form or the other. So I think now you just have to be curious to understand why it's set up that way before you even get to the tools.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, the why is what makes you um, understand the system, understand a layer deep, and figure out where you actually want to go. And that's the problem solving bit, right? That's the fun part, rather than just the plumbing, which is the configuring of the tool, and which you need, because if you are a Splunk engineer or any engineer for that matter, you do need to actually set things up, and learn what configuration works, what configuration doesn't work. Um, uh, but eventually, what matters is you understand the why behind how things are being done.
Yeah, yeah. I would say that's where you would start, most definitely. Be as curious as you can, and there's no question as a stupid question. I'm sure most of the workplaces today they do encourage people to ask as much questions.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And last thing, you have a huge background in consulting, and now you are within an organization, um, helping them with a single focus of that particular organization. I just wanted to touch on that because I have a similar sort of background as well. Started out in consulting and then did did my native client experience as well. Although, so I wanted to understand, like, how you're finding it. And for me, it was a very eye-opening experience, and to see what pressures are there from a customer side. We always know as a consultant we are trying to balance both sides. But for me, the observation was that I could care a lot more towards the other side, as in, like, okay, what do we want to get done as an organization compared to trying to just balance the client side and the customer side, and the consultant side.
Um, for me, the first thing that hit me was the scale of the platform, because the scale of the platform that I'm working on now is many, many times huge. I mean, it's much, much larger than that. That was pretty scary when I started. But yeah, in terms of the difference between doing this in consulting and the other world, I feel like I have a little bit more freedom to explore how. I mean, I feel like there are limitations, of course, but not. Yeah, it just
More ownership,
feel a bit
basically.
more free in
Yeah,
terms of coming up with, well, we you're trying to push boundaries and not think that, oh, this cannot be done or that cannot be done. No, no, nothing is a silly idea here. Yeah, and there's not this, I would say, this tight coupling of, oh, you have to use tool X or tool Y or tool Z. Leave the tools aside, focus on, okay, this is our objective. What we have now, is that enabling us to get to that objective or not? That's the mindset that I see as the difference. Whereas in consulting, you do have, I mean, you are free to consult. I mean, you are being consulted for your expert advice. You are free to give them the advice, but then there are a lot of other factors that influence depending on the industry that the customer is in. For example, banking, they do have a lot of regulatory. There is it's a regulated industry, so you would have a lot of rules and regulations to follow before you can get to your goal. So there's a lot more restriction, I felt, when it comes to customers. Again, telecom, I work with telecom. Again, the same thing applies. They do have rules on how
regulatory
things are
burden.
done.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I felt that's the main difference. Plus, there's a lot of they've already invested a lot of money in a certain tool, and even, yeah, so you're trying to work around what you can get done with what is already available, rather than trying to come up with a solution that would be right but probably isn't right for this customer, because it's just not going to work for many, many reasons.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. There is the aspect of scope management as well. Essentially, um, even though you are brought in as a consultant for a particular problem, like, there is still a scope within which you are operating, and that that also matters quite a bit in terms of ensuring that we balance the priority of the customer to um, whatever the scope that we are asked uh, to be delivered as well. Because at the end of the day, there are customers who would embrace everything that a consultant says and says, "Oh, come on in, like, you're like part of our team. Let's go and do it. Don't worry about the statement of work scope. Um, we can go along, and, like, it's easy enough." But then there are other customers where um, it goes a while like that, but then suddenly the statement of work comes back into play. But hang on, like, we we engaged you to fix this problem. Now you're fixing this problem, and the shift and change. We have to make it very explicit to the customer that, hey, remember, you engaged us to solve this problem. You are asking us to now solve this problem. Are you okay with that? Are you okay with the shift in scope? So I think as a consultant, you need to keep the scope at the back of your mind, just to remind the customer sometimes that, look, we are happy to shift scope as long as you know that you're shifting scope.
That's true. There's a lot of other skills at play, right? When you're consulting. Because
Yes.
you're not just going there as someone, okay, you're given a problem, a tech problem, and you're just solving it now, but there's so many other things at play, like you said, scope. Yeah, you're having to remind that, hey, this is why we are here. Yeah, are we changing the why?
Yeah, are we on the right track? But yeah, it's been interesting to have this chat, and once again, thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Thank you for, yeah, for having me.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. We should do this more often, and
Yes.
next time we'll find more topics.
Yeah, sure. Yes, we should. It'll be,
Yeah,
yeah, it'll be fun to, yeah, spark more conversations. Yeah.
awesome, awesome. Thank you for watching or listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed this content, do like and subscribe to encourage me to create more videos like this. Also, share your thoughts, comments, and words of wisdom in the comments below so that I can keep improving the next video for you. Thanks again.